It's happening again. You're lying in bed at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, and the realization hits you like a freight train. You've done it again. Different person, different city, different year, but the exact same pattern. The same kind of partner who pulls away, the same job that makes you feel invisible, the same friendship that drains you dry. You promised yourself this time would be different. You saw the red flags, you knew better. But here you are, in the same painful place you swore you'd never return to. And the question that keeps you awake isn't just, why did this happen? It's something deeper, something more unsettling. Why do I keep choosing this? Here's what you need to understand. You're not broken, you're not cursed, and you're definitely not stupid. What's happening has a name. Psychologists call it repetition, compulsion, and understanding it might be the first step toward finally breaking free. Let's start with Jennifer's story. Jennifer is 37, a marketing executive with an impressive career trajectory. She's articulate, self-aware, and has been in therapy on and off for a decade. She came to see me because she had just ended her 4th significant relationship, and she was terrified that she was the problem. They're all the same person, she told me in our first session, her voice barely above a whisper. I meet someone. They're charming, attentive, overwhelming in their pursuit of me. I feel chosen, special. Then, slowly, they start pulling away, becoming critical, emotionally unavailable, and instead of leaving, I try harder. I convince myself that if I can just be better, they'll come back. And by the time I finally leave, I'm a shell of who I was. Jennifer's pattern is textbook repetition compulsion, a concept first identified by Sigmund Freud, but refined by countless researchers since. The basic principle is this: we unconsciously recreate painful experiences from our past, particularly from childhood, in an attempt to master them. It's as if our psyche believes that by revisiting the scene of the crime, we might finally get a different ending. But here's the devastating truth: we rarely do, not without intervention, not without awareness. In Jennifer's case, the pattern traced back to her father. He was a successful surgeon, admired by everyone, but emotionally absent at home. He would have brief periods of engagement, playing with Jennifer, showing interest in her life, making her feel like the center of his world. Then he would withdraw, becoming cold and critical, especially when Jennifer needed him most. I remember being 7 years old, Jennifer recalled, practicing my ballet routine for hours because Dad said he'd come to my recital. He seemed excited about it, but the day came and he didn't show up. Surgery ran late, he said. I told myself it wasn't his fault. I told myself I understood, but something inside me broke that day. And you know what I did? I practiced, even harder for the next one, as if being better at ballet would make him show up. This is where attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, becomes crucial. Jennifer developed what psychologists call an anxious attachment style. She learned that love is inconsistent, that affection must be earned, and that the withdrawal of attention is something she caused and must therefore fix. As an adult, Jennifer doesn't consciously choose partners who mirror her father, but there's something deeply familiar about the push-pull dynamic. Something that feels like home, even when home was painful. Her nervous system has been wired to interpret inconsistent affection as love. Stability feels foreign, safe feels boring. The psychological mechanism at play here is what researcher Bessel van der Kolk calls trauma reenactment. Our brains, particularly the amygdala and hippocampus, store emotional memories differently than conscious memories. These implicit memories don't come with timestamps or context. They exist as feelings, as bodily sensations, as attraction or repulsion. When Jennifer meets someone who triggers that familiar pattern of intense pursuit followed by withdrawal, her implicit memory lights up. It doesn't say, "Warning, this person reminds you of your father." Instead, it says, "This feels right. This feels like love." Her conscious mind might notice red flags, but her unconscious mind is already committed to the script. And now, let's consider Marcus, 42, a software engineer. Either figure out why he sabotages every good thing in his life, or she's leaving. Marcus's pattern was different from Jennifer's, but equally destructive. Every time something good happened, every time success was within reach, he would implode. He'd landed a promotion to lead a major project at work, only to miss crucial deadlines because he forgot about them. His marriage was stable and loving, but whenever his wife showed genuine affection, he'd pick fights or stay late at work. He had started a side business that was gaining traction, then stopped returning client emails. "I don't understand myself," Marcus said, his frustration palpable. "I work so hard for these things. I want them, and then when I get them, I destroy them. It's like watching someone else pilot my body." Marcus's pattern is what psychologists call self-sabotage, but it's rooted in something specific, what's known as upper limit problem, a term popularized by psychologist Gay Hendricks, but based on deeper psychological principles. The concept is simple but profound. We all have an internal thermostat for how much success, love, or happiness we believe we deserve. When we exceed that limit, we unconsciously find ways to bring ourselves back down. For Marcus, this thermostat was set in childhood. He grew up in a household where his father was an alcoholic, and his mother worked multiple jobs to keep the family afloat. There was never enough money, never enough stability, never enough attention to go around. Marcus, the eldest of 4 children, learned to be invisible. He learned that his needs didn't matter. He learned that taking up space was selfish. But here's the insidious part. His family's dysfunction gave him a role. He was the responsible one, the one who kept his head down, who didn't ask for anything, who helped his mother without complaint. In that chaotic environment, being small and self-sufficient was how Marcus felt valuable. It was his contribution to the family system. As an adult, success threatens that identity. When Marcus leads a project at work, he's no longer the invisible helper. When his wife shows affection, it demands he acknowledge his own worth. When his business succeeds, he can no longer hide behind the belief that he's just getting by. These situations create what psychologist Leon Festinger termed cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort of holding 2 contradictory beliefs simultaneously. For Marcus, the contradictory beliefs are, "I want success and love, and I don't deserve success and love." The unconscious mind, remarkably efficient at resolving such conflicts, simply acts to restore equilibrium. It sabotages the success to match the internal belief system. There's also something else at play in Marcus's story, what psychologists call survivor's guilt. His siblings struggled. One brother is in and out of rehab. His sister dropped out of college to care for their aging mother. Marcus escaped. He got the education, the career, the stable life. But part of him feels that his success is a betrayal, that by thriving, he's somehow abandoning his family or proving he never really belonged to their world of struggle. This guilt operates beneath conscious awareness. It manifests as self-sabotage, ensuring Marcus never gets too far ahead, never fully separates from the family narrative of hardship. It's a loyalty to suffering, and it's far more common than most people realize. It's in the script too. A teacher who sought help because she couldn't understand why she kept getting into friendships that ended in betrayal. The pattern was consistent. She would meet someone, feel an instant connection, share her deepest secrets quickly, and become intensely close. Then, inevitably, the friend would either betray her confidence or ghost her completely. "I'm starting to think I have a sign on my forehead that says, 'Please hurt me,'" Diane said, attempting humor but unable to mask the pain underneath. Diane's pattern relates to what psychologists call schema theory, developed by Jeffrey Young. Schemas are deeply held beliefs about ourselves and the world, formed in childhood and reinforced throughout life. They act as filters through which we interpret experience, and crucially, they're self-perpetuating. Diane's schema, formed when her mother abandoned the family when Diane was 8, is what's called an abandonment schema. The core belief, "People I love will leave me. I am not worth staying for." But here's where it gets complicated. Diane doesn't just passively experience abandonment, she unconsciously creates the conditions for it. How? Through what psychologists call schema maintenance, schema avoidance, and schema compensation. Let's break these down. Schema maintenance is when we unconsciously seek out situations that confirm our core beliefs. Diane gravitates toward people who are emotionally unavailable or have a history of unstable friendships. These people feel familiar, safe in their unsafety. Available, consistent people feel foreign to her nervous system. Schema avoidance is when we avoid situations that might challenge our core beliefs. Diane shares secrets too quickly, not because she's naturally open, but because it's a test. She's trying to speed run to the point of abandonment, to get it over with, to prove her schema right, and avoid the anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Schema compensation is when we overcompensate for our fears in ways that paradoxically bring about what we fear. Diane becomes intensely attached quickly, overwhelming new friends with the depth of her need. This intensity, born from her fear of abandonment, actually drives people away. The cruel irony is that each time a friendship ends, it confirms Diane's schema. "See," her unconscious mind whispers, "I was right. People leave." The schema grows stronger, the pattern deepens. But there's another layer to Diane's story, one that speaks to the neuroscience of repetition. When her mother left, Diane's brain was still developing. That abandonment wasn't just an event. It was encoded into her neural circuitry during a critical period of brain development. The pathways that formed in response to that trauma became the default pathways for processing relationships. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux's research shows us that emotional learning, especially fear-based learning, creates incredibly strong neural pathways. These pathways don't just store memory, they prepare us for similar future events. In Diane's brain, the pathways are constantly scanning for signs of abandonment, hypervigilant to any hint that someone might leave. This hypervigilance manifests as what might look like intuition. "I knew they would leave," Diane says after each friendship ends. But it's not intuition, it's pattern recognition based on selective attention. Her brain is so focused on finding evidence of impending abandonment that it misses evidence of stability and misinterprets neutral signals as threatening ones. Turner. Annie now the case of Thomas, 51, a corporate lawyer who came to therapy at his doctor's recommendation after his third stress-related health scare. Thomas's pattern wasn't romantic or interpersonal in the traditional sense. His pattern was with work. Every job started the same way: enthusiasm, excellent performance, recognition. Then, inevitably, Thomas would become indispensable to the point of burnout. He'd take on more than anyone could reasonably handle, work 18-hour days, sacrifice weekends and vacations. His health would decline, his relationships would suffer, and then, just before complete collapse, he'd quit or get fired for an angry outburst, swearing he'd never let work consume him again. 6 months later, the pattern would repeat with a new employer. "I see it happening," Thomas told me. his exhaustion evident. I'm watching myself do it in real time, and I can't stop. It's like being a passenger in my own life. Thomas's pattern is rooted in what Alice Miller, in her groundbreaking work on childhood trauma, called the drama of the gifted child. Thomas grew up with a depressed mother and an absent father. From a young age, he learned that his value came from what he could do for others, particularly his mother. He became her emotional support, her reason to get out of bed, her accomplishment. The technical term for this is parentification, when a child is forced to take on adult responsibilities, particularly emotional caretaking, before they're developmentally ready. For Thomas, being needed wasn't just nice, it was survival. If his mother was okay, the household was stable. If he failed to keep her okay, everything fell apart. As an adult, Thomas unconsciously recreates this dynamic at work. He doesn't just want to do well, he needs to be indispensable. Being needed by his employer, his colleagues, his clients, this is where he feels his worth. But just like in childhood, the cost is his own well-being. There's a physiological component here too. When Thomas is working at an unsustainable pace, his body is flooded with stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. These chemicals are meant for short-term survival responses, not chronic activation. But for Thomas, this activated state feels normal. It feels like home. Calm feels wrong, even dangerous. This relates to what psychiatrist Peter Levine calls the trauma vortex. Traumatic stress doesn't just live in our memories, it lives in our bodies. Thomas's nervous system was trained in childhood to operate in survival mode. When he tries to relax, to work reasonable hours, to not be needed, his nervous system interprets this as danger. It whispers, "Something bad will happen if you're not vigilant, if you're not working, if you're not proving your worth." So Thomas creates situations that justify his anxiety. He overcommits, he becomes indispensable, and his nervous system finally feels aligned with his environment. The external chaos matches the internal state. The tragedy is that Thomas is exhausted, but he's also addicted to his exhaustion. It's the only way he knows how to feel secure. Inc. explore the mechanisms of change. Jens explore the mechanisms of change. Meet Rachel, 34, an artist who came to therapy because she realized she had never finished anything significant in her life. She had started 3 novels, abandoned each around the halfway point. She'd begun a graduate degree, quit before the thesis. She'd planned a wedding, called it off 6 weeks before. "I get so close," Rachel said, her voice thick with frustration. "And then I just stop. I lose interest. Or I convince myself it's not what I really want. Or I find some fatal flaw. And I walk away. Every single time." Rachel's pattern is what psychologists call fear of success, but it's more nuanced than it sounds. It's not that Rachel fears achievement itself. She fears what comes after achievement. She fears the visibility, the permanence, the inability to take it back. This fear is rooted in childhood trauma, but trauma of a different kind. Rachel grew up in a household where her father was rageful and unpredictable. He would fixate on any perceived flaw or failure, screaming and sometimes becoming physically violent. But he would also fixate on successes, turning them into pressure, into expectations that Rachel couldn't possibly maintain. When Rachel got straight A's one semester, her father's response wasn't pride. It was, "Good. Now you know what you're capable of. Anything less is unacceptable." When she painted a piece that won a school competition, he hung it prominently in the living room and showed it to every visitor, making Rachel perform and explain her process repeatedly. Success became a trap. It meant visibility, scrutiny, pressure. It meant becoming a target for her father's intensity, whether that intensity was rage or overwhelming expectations. Failure, while painful, at least let Rachel fly under the radar. This created what psychologists call an approach-avoidance conflict. Part of Rachel desperately wants to complete something, to achieve, to be seen. But another part, the part that learned that visibility is dangerous, sabotages her efforts. There's a term in behavioral psychology developed by B.F. Skinner and, later refined, intermittent reinforcement. It's one of the most powerful forms of conditioning. If a behavior is rewarded sometimes but not always, it becomes incredibly persistent. Rachel's pattern of starting, then stopping, has been intermittently reinforced throughout her life. Sometimes she quits and feels relief, the reinforcement of avoiding danger. Sometimes she quits and feels regret, the punishment that makes her try again with a new project. This inconsistency keeps the pattern alive far more effectively than consistent success or consistent failure would. There's also an identity component. If Rachel finishes the novel, she becomes a novelist. If she completes the degree, she becomes an expert. These identities feel permanent, binding. As long as she's working on something, she can maintain the identity of someone with potential without the risk of someone who succeeded and might fail at the next thing. This relates to what Carol Dweck's research on fixed versus growth mindsets illuminates. Rachel has internalized a fixed mindset about her abilities and worth. She believes she has a certain amount of talent and that completing something big will either prove or disprove her worth definitively. As long as she never finishes, the question remains open. It's a kind of psychological stalemate that feels safer than definitive judgment. Now that we've seen these patterns in action, 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 let's step back and examine the broader psychological mechanisms that underlie all of them. The first and perhaps most important mechanism is what Freud originally called the repetition compulsion, though our understanding has evolved significantly since his time. The modern interpretation goes like this. When we experience something traumatic or confusing in childhood, particularly something that happens repeatedly, our developing brain tries to make sense of it. It creates a kind of internal model, a script for how relationships work, how the world operates, what we can expect. This script lives in our implicit memory, the kind of memory that operates below conscious awareness. It's not something we remember, it's something we feel, something that shapes our perceptions and behaviors without our conscious input. When we encounter situations in adulthood that resemble the original traumatic or confusing situations, our implicit memory activates. And here's the crucial part. It doesn't activate as a memory. It activates as a feeling of rightness, of familiarity, sometimes even as attraction or love. This is why Jennifer is attracted to emotionally unavailable partners, why Marcus sabotages success, why Diane rushes intimacy, why Thomas overworks, why Rachel quits before finishing. They're not consciously choosing these patterns. Their nervous systems are responding to familiar stimuli and executing learned scripts. The second mechanism is what's called the self-fulfilling prophecy, first described by sociologist Robert Merton. Our beliefs about ourselves and the world shape our behavior in ways that make those beliefs come true. If you believe you're unlovable, you'll behave in ways either pushing people away or clinging desperately that eventually drive people away. If you believe you don't deserve success, you'll sabotage opportunities until you fail. The belief creates the reality, which strengthens the belief. The third mechanism involves what psychologists call defensive behaviors. These are the strategies we develop to protect ourselves from psychological pain. Sometimes these strategies worked in childhood. Being invisible kept Marcus safe. Testing friendships quickly gave Diane a sense of control. Not finishing protected Rachel from judgment. But defensive behaviors that worked in childhood often become maladaptive in adulthood. They protect us from imagined dangers while creating real ones. They keep us safe in ways that ultimately keep us stuck. The fourth mechanism is neurological. Repeated experiences create neural pathways, literally physical structures in the brain. When those pathways form during childhood, during critical periods of brain development, they become part of our brain's architecture. They're not impossible to change, but they're our brain's default setting. This is why these patterns feel automatic, why they seem to happen despite our best intentions. We're not weak-willed or self-destructive. We're running on deeply embedded programming that once served a purpose. The fifth and final mechanism I want to highlight is what's known as secondary gains. Sometimes our maladaptive patterns provide benefits that make them hard to relinquish. If you're always in crisis, people rescue you. If you're always struggling, you never have to face the fear of success. If you're always the victim, you never have to examine your role in your suffering. These secondary gains aren't conscious manipulation. They're unconscious benefits that reinforce problematic patterns. Acknowledging them is crucial for change. Us, E. How do people like Jennifer, Marcus, Diane, Thomas, and Rachel find their way out of repetition? The first and most crucial step is awareness. You cannot change what you cannot see. For Jennifer, the turning point came when she created what her therapist called a relationship timeline. She listed every significant relationship, noted the patterns, and saw, in black and white, that she'd been dating the same person over and over with different faces. It was devastating, she said, but also liberating. I couldn't deny it anymore. I couldn't tell myself the next person would be different. I had to accept I was choosing these people for a reason. This kind of awareness isn't about self-blame. It's about moving from why does this keep happening to me to why do I keep choosing this. That shift in question changes everything. It moves you from powerless to empowered. For Marcus, awareness came through tracking. His therapist had him keep a journal, noting every time something good happened and what he did in the following 48 hours. The pattern was unmistakable. Good news was consistently followed by self-sabotaging behavior within 2 days. Seeing it mapped out made the unconscious conscious. The second step is what therapists call making the implicit explicit. This means connecting your current patterns to their origins. It means asking, where did I learn this? What was I protecting myself from? What did this behavior accomplish for me then? Diane's breakthrough came when she realized that sharing too much too fast wasn't openness, it was a test. She was trying to trigger abandonment early to get it over with. Understanding this didn't immediately change her behavior, but it created a pause, a moment of choice where there had only been compulsion. Thomas had to confront the painful reality that being needed felt like love because it was the closest thing to love he received as a child. His mother needed him, so at least he had value. Separating his worth from his usefulness required grief for the child who never got to just be loved without earning it. The third step involves what psychologists call corrective emotional experiences. This is a fancy term for you need to practice new patterns in real situations. You need to prove to your nervous system that different outcomes are possible. For Jennifer, this meant intentionally dating someone who felt boring, stable, consistent, emotionally available. It felt wrong at first, like eating food without salt. Her nervous system kept insisting something was missing, but she stayed with the discomfort, and slowly, stability began to feel less foreign. Rachel had to practice finishing small things. Not novels too big. She started with short stories. 1 page, 3 pages, 10 pages. Finishing and allowing them to exist imperfectly. Each completion was proof that she could survive being seen, that visibility didn't mean danger. The fourth step is often therapy, particularly trauma-focused approaches. EMDR, internal family systems, somatic. Experiencing these modalities help reprocess traumatic memories and reorganize the neural pathways that keep us stuck. They create the neurological flexibility necessary for change. But therapy isn't the only path. Understanding these mechanisms, practicing awareness, seeking corrective experiences, these can happen outside a therapist's office. They require commitment and patience, but they're possible. The fifth step, and perhaps the most important, is self-compassion. Breaking these patterns isn't about fighting yourself. It's not about willpower or forcing yourself to be different. It's about understanding that these patterns made sense once. They were your best attempt at survival, at love, at safety. The goal isn't to hate the pattern or hate yourself for having it. The goal is to outgrow it, to develop new strategies that serve you better. That requires gentleness, not harshness. Marcus learned to notice his self-sabotage impulses with curiosity rather than judgment. Oh, there it is, he'd think when he felt the urge to miss a deadline. That's the part of me that believes I don't deserve this. Hello, old friend, I see you. But I'm going to choose differently today. That relationship with his patterns, seeing them as protective parts rather than defects, made all the difference. Here's what I want you to understand. Here's what I want you to understand. Here's what I want you to understand if you find yourself repeating painful patterns. Here's what I want you to understand if you find yourself repeating painful patterns. You're not broken. You're not cursed. You're not uniquely damaged. You're human. You're operating according to psychological principles that affect everyone. You learned early lessons about how the world works, about what you deserve, about how to stay safe. And your brain, remarkably efficient and devoted to your survival, is still operating according to those lessons. But here's the beautiful truth. The brain that learned those patterns can learn new ones. The nervous system that expects danger can learn to recognize safety. The beliefs that were formed in childhood can be updated in adulthood. It won't happen overnight. Breaking free from repetition compulsion isn't a single decision. It's 1,000 small choices, made moment by moment, day by day. It's choosing the stable partner even when they feel boring. It's finishing the project even when anxiety screams at you to quit. It's allowing yourself success even when guilt tells you to sabotage. It's being alone rather than rushing into the wrong friendship. It's resting instead of overworking. Each choice is a small rebellion against your history. Each choice is a vote for who you want to become rather than who you've been. Jennifer is now in a stable relationship. She still notices the pull toward emotionally unavailable people, but she recognizes it for what it is, nostalgia for suffering, not attraction to love. Marcus still catches himself taking on too much at work, but now he has tools to interrupt the pattern. He's learning, slowly, to receive without earning. Diane has fewer friendships now, but they're deeper, healthier. She's learned to tolerate the anxiety of not knowing whether someone will stay, to resist the urge to test and push. Thomas works 40-hour weeks now. His health has improved. He's rediscovering hobbies he abandoned decades ago. He still feels guilty sometimes, still hears the voice that says he should be doing more, but he's learning to question it. Rachel finished her novel. It wasn't perfect. Some days she still wants to disown it, but it exists, it's out in the world, and she survived the visibility. Your patterns don't have to be your destiny. The past shaped you, but it doesn't have to script your future. You can become aware, you can understand, you can choose differently. The repetition can end, not because you're strong enough to force it to stop, but because you're brave enough to understand why it started, compassionate enough to forgive yourself for repeating it, and willing enough to try something new. That's not self-help optimism, that's psychological reality. The patterns that were learned can be unlearned. The scripts that were written can be rewritten. It starts with awareness, it continues with compassion, it succeeds with practice. You're not doomed to repeat forever, you're standing at the beginning of something different. And that beginning starts now.